A warm welcome to episode 46 of Lost for Words. I am your host Jason, and this week I am joined by historian and host of the History Voyager podcast, Ben Kitchings. This episode has a more American feel to it. Ben is a native of Atlanta, Georgia, and we discuss the evolution of many of the systems underpinning society today. We also chat about the future of virtual reality and virtual workplaces post-COVID, and the general state of affairs in both US and world politics. A quick housekeeping note before we get started. Please leave a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts, whether that be Apple, Google, Spotify, Podbean or any other platform. It's the best way the podcast can grow and better content can be produced for you, the listener. It's your listening experience that matters the most. But enough from me, now on to today's episode of Lost for Words. So on your voyage through history, what have you discovered?
Well, I wanted to talk a little bit about I've always wanted to talk about what I've discovered. Well, I didn't know that there were so many systems that weren't working as advertised, right? I didn't know that there were so many problems that people had that maybe our parents didn't have, or our grandparents didn't have, or whatever. And like I'll give you an example. I talked today to a man in England. I had a podcast with a man in England today. And we talked about how he's a teacher. And he teaches at a girls' school. And he said all these girls, and they're all like 15 years old, have seen, like, they've all gotten pictures of a penis. Like a dick pic. And he's saying like things like, we were talking about, also with the free porn that everybody has or people have access to.
But I think, is that what makes you think that that wasn't the case before? Is it just the explosion of in that circumstance?
Some of it's frankly not anatomically possible. Well, when I was 15 years old, you had to pay for it. You had to pay for it, and you also had, if you were, okay, you didn't have, adults didn't have, adults just didn't have access to kids like they do now. For one, I mean, hold on, let me take my medicine. Okay, but that's just one tiny example. Like another thing is like what we were talking about on our podcast, how the college system, like you're with your girlfriend not being able to find a job. So I can tell you this because it's my podcast, it's your podcast. My best friend has an art degree, and as near as I can figure, the only people who make money off of a fine arts degree are the construction crews and the contractors that build these museums where the colleges are, on these college campuses where they hang their art. And maybe the person on the other end of that email. Maybe that's it. But the fact is that, it just got out of hand, and you hear that all over the world. Similar type situations. You hear about, but then on the other hand, this is something positive. there's a young lady who lives in Venezuela, or who used to live in Venezuela, who now lives in Barcelona, and she was able to have a job virtually and work in Miami and live in Venezuela, and then now she lives in Spain and works in Miami. I mean, so that's a positive thing. But it's like the
And for every one positive like that, there are a multitude. You're talking hundreds of thousands to millions of negatives for that one positive
I mean,
case.
maybe. I mean, okay. Here's a thought that I had yesterday morning. Okay. The thought I had was, I'll bet you that by 2030, so my country in the US, our constitution is essentially from the Middle Ages, right? It's essentially from the Middle Ages. It badly needs updating, but nobody trusts the government to do that, let alone nobody trusts the Republicans to do that, let alone the US government. Um okay. The thought I had yesterday morning was, I thought, honestly, like, you're by 2030, you're going to have a lot of people, because you're going to have virtual reality. You're going to have these virtual reality suits that are amazing. You're going to have all this stuff. You're going to have people sleeping in my hometown, which is in Georgia in the US, and working in Berlin. And this is going to be totally normal and completely accepted. And but what do you do with the tax? How do you collect taxes off that? And what happens when you have all these intelligent people who already have a job virtually? They could just leave. They could go, so they don't have to play along. They don't have to vote. If the vote doesn't go the way they want it to, they could just leave. You know, which is a positive thing, but it's also a negative thing. Yeah.
See, my take on that would be if I had to throw in the aspect of what happens to if people go to these virtual jobs, or like the employment becomes virtual based. What happens to the physical workplace, the office, the concept of the office? I think that will basically disappear in that same time frame too, because I think
Oh,
if the COVID has taught us anything, that all this vast space in city centres, or downtown as you call it, it's obsolete now. There's no people are choosing to work from home. That will coalesce into, as you say, working from home
exactly.
beyond
I mean,
borders.
exactly. And the thing I learned, because I have a podcast, is it's amazing how many people speak English. It's it's shocking. I mean, how many people speak English? And you know, I don't know. So on the one hand, I see myself as positioned in a good way, but on the other hand, I see, people in my country positioned in a bad way, because if you've got people who don't even believe COVID is real, and they're trying to compete in a global marketplace that they don't even know exists yet, you know, and the thing the thing I say, or the thing that keeps occurring to me, is a lot of people I talk to, almost nobody had been working from home. Like, people had been working from home before 2020, of the people I talked to. So this has been going on for a while. It's just that COVID sort of brings it out, you know.
Yeah, COVID made it penetrate the popular, like the population as such, because people that are just so used to commuting to the office, that just stopped, and then it made them realise you reprioritise things. You think, why was I doing that in a cost basis? If you're saving yourself money on public transport or using your car, that aspect, and then the time that you can then spend in your house in your own environment, it beats.
Also, another thing is you think about the meals that people eat out because they're either commuting or they're working in an office, and that's money in your pocket. But so what were some of the negative aspects that you thought of when I said, well, that's the one positive aspect?
I think social skills, people become hermits, and I see it now that I'm a teacher as well, and I think there's still some of the teachers that, especially when we first came back, that were very almost apprehensive to engage with the children and then with the other teachers because they had been so used to teaching from their iPad in their house for a prolonged length of time that people forget and don't want to be sociable anymore.
I mean, well, I've studied history and I've studied it longer. I've studied it more now than I did when I was in school. I mean, you always.
What does history tell us?
Socialization, I mean, changes. Like socialization changes over time. So right now, we don't have a virtual reality setup, you and me, right? So that we could see each other. Okay. But according to some of my guests, like if you wait 5 or 10 years, one of my guests said 5, the other one said 10. We'd be able to put on a virtual reality suit or headset and just see each other. So the thing, and I said this in my podcast with you, I think, but the thing that strikes me a lot is we didn't invent something to make this happen. We're just using pre-existing technology, right? When you come away from this in 3 years, I think we're going to have products, things to buy for the idea that you're working from home across borders or, whatever.
You think virtual reality could find its way there because you could then have the office being the virtual place that you go to in the head when you put the goggles on? The way you're saying, so you don't need a physical office space if someone in Venezuela and someone in Barcelona can put on the goggles and then they're in the same place.
Well, okay. I remember when the smartphone first came out. Like, I remember the smartphone being a thing, first being a thing. And the way it took off, where, say, the BlackBerry kind of didn't, or it did, but the iPhone took off more, was the iPhone was marketed to kids, right? And then the adults kind of took it over. So I think what's going to happen is that the kids are going to want to meet each other. I just got off a podcast with a man who's a teacher. And he said he teaches, like I said, 15-year-old girls. And he said it's nothing for them to just have virtual friends, right? And he talked about, there's a website he mentioned where it's like just random webcams and you can surf random webcams. Well, as problematic as that is, that's the world they're growing up into. So it's not a big leap to think, well, eventually they're going to want to go meet those people with virtual reality suits or whatever. And then I think it'll go into the office. Right. Then I think it'll graduate into the office. Okay. You see what I'm saying?
So you think it'll go from the adolescents
probably with the same people, probably with the same adolescents who, hey, yeah, okay, I met my friends But hey, we can have a meeting with this. Oh, okay, cool. You know, um,
I suppose the passing of time means those adolescents will become the working
exactly. Those
population too.
15. One of my professors said that kids have an annoying habit of becoming adults. you know, kids have an
Exactly.
annoying habit of becoming adults. So yeah, I mean, I really like. What's an example? What's an example? There's Skype. Skype. I've talked to so many people that are a little bit younger than me to talk about. Well, I hadn't used my Skype in 5 years, and here I am using. You know, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
so am I concerned that you're not having the physical socialization as much? Yes. Do I think that's a passing phase? That'll pass. I sure do. I think eventually we're going to figure out a way to live with COVID. I think everybody pretty much is going to figure out a way to live with COVID because I don't think people can stay holed up in places forever.
I think we're almost at that point now too. I think we'll here in the UK. Let's talk about the COVID restrictions just being dissolved from March. So from next month, it's over. The powers, there's no more powers. There's no more emergency. That's it. That's been what? Sorry. Yeah, it'll be 2 years in March. Yeah. Uh, so what's the current lie of the land where you are with it?
Well, like I said, there's a lot of traffic. I think a lot of people moved here. So I live in Atlanta, Georgia. We talked about this on my podcast. Um, I live in Atlanta, Georgia. Um, I think it's one of the fastest growing places in North and South America. I think a lot of people moved here after the pandemic in this country officially with maybe uh, a couple of months, if that. So it's like immediate. There was a census every 10 years. So after the census, we just got a whole lot of people because people moved here because the place was shut down. So those people are still here. I mean, the traffic is insane. Excuse me, the traffic. Let me say that again, so you can edit that burp out. Those people are still here. The traffic is insane. Um, you know, the food prices are astronomical. The price of like food, the price of beef, especially, is just crazy.
And has that happened over the last year since the influx of people has started?
I would say, well, it's happened because of the supply chain issues we have in this country. Um, I mean, there is. I don't want to say like there's no beef. There is beef. At least where I shop, there is beef, but it's like I'm eating a lot of turkey, a lot of sandwich meat because like cuts of beef and ground beef is just like really way more expensive than it used to be. And eggs, man, eggs are just let's see, $6 for 18. But you gotta have eggs. So what's up?
That's what 33, like one third of a dollar for one egg. Then
Well, okay. Before the pandemic, eggs were like 99 cents for 18. So now you're talking, yeah. So now you're talking $6 for 18 eggs, which is a lot, but it's like it's doable. I mean, it's not, you know, it's doable. But the price of beef is just like you would not believe. Like it's crazy.
The problem we've just had here is that the cost of we've got a cost of living crisis that's starting as well, but it's the cost of energy, like electricity and gas. The cost of that has gone up by basically half. So it's went from, I think there was like a price cap that was that you so they couldn't charge you any more than this maximum amount, and that maximum amount has gone up by 54%, I think, in April because of the supply against a supply chain thing, which is questionable because we produce a lot of electricity here. We've got great wind farms and stuff.
Well,
It's puzzling.
don't you get oil and gas from Russia?
We can also produce our own as well. We've got the North
Yeah.
Sea here, but yeah, Russia. It's not a good time to be negotiating with Russia.
Yeah, it's funny because you and I are at the time we're recording this. I don't think we're officially in a conflict with the Ukraine and Russia, but I don't know.
In the next week, yeah, it will be.
I don't know next week, but tomorrow, a month from now, not a month from now. Hell, I've seen those. Have you seen that stuff on Twitter and TikTok?
I've seen it's the videos of the troops just basically sitting there at the border. What
Yeah,
stuff are you referring to?
yeah, exactly. They're massing
Yeah.
anti-tank. Oh my God, it's like, and Jesus, we're gonna have something's gonna pop off. Something's gonna happen.
No, I think it's crazy though that in the era of nuclear weapons that they're still doing the trench warfare. That's the bit I don't understand because surely that's just solved by somebody pressing a button and
I,
then boom.
I really wonder honestly if I talk to so many people, and I've talked to Eastern Europeans, and they're really worried. I mean, they are. They're really worried, and I'm not one of these people that says America should just go everywhere and solve everybody's problem. But I really wonder if you should do that. I mean, if obviously, you know, should America do that? I mean, should America go help Ukraine or whatever? I don't know because I'm from the generation where we fought in Iraq. You know, but Ukraine is not Iraq, and I understand that. They want democracy there in the Ukraine. They didn't want it in Iraq.
But there's also a sizable chunk of the Ukrainians that do see themselves as Russian. Like I didn't understand that as well. But I have a friend of a friend who
Yeah.
was from Donetsk, and which is right where that's part of Crimea, which has basically become Russia anyway. And she was saying to us that there are a lot of Ukrainians that still identify as being Soviet and would basically be okay with Russia coming in and taking over. But
maybe they're just going to do a border. I mean, maybe, I don't know. I honestly don't know, but I do think that I don't know how you have, okay, as a historian person, I don't know how you fight Russia over a long enough timeline and it doesn't end up going nuclear. I don't understand how that happens. I also don't understand. There's a part of me that honestly says, I mean, try not to have a nuclear war. Try really hard not to have a nuclear war. However,
would a
that
nuclear
happens.
war not just be the end of everything for everybody anyway?
I don't know. And I don't know what that would look like because so you have to understand that the current setup we have in the Western world or the global North or whatever you want to call it, right, was set up after World War II with the idea that you would defend yourself against, or you would defend these nations against the Soviet Union. And then the Soviet Union collapsed, and people thought it was over for the longest time. And then I think you had 2016, with Trump and all that. And I think a lot of people got a wake up call that I don't know the Russians ever thought the Cold War was over. Right. And I just don't know what that looks like.
See, like, hypothetically, if Trump were still the commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces, do you think it would be any different?
Oh, it'd be, first of all, Trump was being, okay. First of all, Trump, the Republican Party was being paid by Russia. I mean, people know that. They were being paid by Russia through the NRA. This is a thing that's known. The question is whether or not Trump actually himself personally colluded with Vladimir Putin to rig the election. That's a question, right? So I think actually, if Trump were president, we'd be fighting the Ukraine. We wouldn't be fighting Russia. I mean, that would be a coup right there. I mean, yeah. So, I
mean, what does history suggest about like a sort of conflict like that? Like, what are the pros and cons of the US getting involved?
Of the U.S. getting involved in okay, when you're talking about the U.S. getting involved in a war for Ukrainian independence, or to prevent Russia from expanding its sphere of influence into Western Europe, what are the pros and cons? Well, Russia is not democratic. The U.S. has a history of fighting for democracies all over the world, and that actually was one of the things we were supposed to do in Iraq, was bring democracy to the Iraqis, and that didn't work out. The con would be, well, I mean, I don't know how it ends. I don't know. Are we going to start a nuclear war over this? I hope not. America doesn't have a stomach for a long war, is the other thing. Right? We were in Afghanistan for a very long time, but that was a different ballgame. I mean, that's an American idiom. That was a different situation because, first of all, we can't look at an Afghani and identify with that. Okay, identify with that person as like that person looks like us, right? Whereas we could do that with a Ukrainian person. So also, social media is more like TikTok, and where you didn't have Afghani people with TikTok accounts, and you do in the Ukraine. Okay, you see what I'm saying? So you're gonna see at the ground level what's going on here. Everybody, it's going to be all over your phone. Everybody. If it stays conventional, I don't see how Vladimir Putin stays in power. Honestly. If it stays conventional, I don't see how Vladimir Putin stays in power. We have the biggest military. America, the US of A, has the biggest military on the world by far. By far. This is a very warlike country. The reason our politics are so crazy right now is because we don't have somebody to fight. So we're fighting each other. That's why our politics is so nuts. Honestly, we don't have an external enemy. This would be an external enemy that we could actually sink our teeth into, so to speak. Also, from what I understand, most of Russia, like most of the land in Russia, is basically wasteland or frozen. You can't really live on it. They don't have, most of their population is in the west part of Russia, or I guess, yeah. So from a Eurocentric standpoint, yeah, the western part of Russia instead of the eastern part of Russia. I don't. If it stays conventional, I don't think Vladimir Putin is going to stay in power.
Based on them losing a traditional warfare, then he would have to go.
Well, based on the fact that we have a bigger military than they do. And based on the fact that he would be, I mean, we have a bigger military than they do. But see, that's why I don't think it's going to stay conventional, per se, is that he's going to want to stay in power. Right? I don't think he thinks that the U.S. is going to invade, or I don't think he thinks the U.S. is going to care too much. You know, when he was working with the KGB, his job was to understand the American society. So I would assume he understands us well enough to know that, you know, we don't, as warlike as we seem to be, we also don't, we're not a, I don't see this war lasting 30 years. Of course, I never saw Afghanistan lasting 25.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I would agree. I don't think Afghanistan was supposed to go on for 20 years, 19 years, whatever it was.
So I think the thing it's going to do before it does that is I think it's going to cause, I think one of the things this is going to cause is a massive refugee crisis, like a serious refugee crisis.
And how different do you think that will be? Because, as you were saying, Ukrainians are white-skinned people. Do you think there'll be less of a backlash? Well, the way that we do here, we have the migrants that cross the channel from France, and it's basically a racist thing that because they look different to what most people do, that we don't want them here.
Well, here's what I think. And because this is my podcast, I can be honest. Or your podcast, I can be honest. Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say this on my podcast, but I'll say it on yours. We have a pretty serious racial problem in this country. It's not as serious as some other places, but it's pretty serious. I think the Black community, the African American community in this country, is going to be in for a massive shock when they find out that you're going to have all these Eastern Europeans that look white. A lot of these people are well educated, or better, pretty well educated. I think they're going to assimilate into some form of Western society relatively quickly, whether that be in the UK or in Germany or in America or in Canada. I don't know. But I'll tell you, in my country, the immigration system in my country is a disaster, is a complete disaster. The reason why we have what we call an illegal immigration problem is either because they intended it to be a disaster, the powers that be, or because they never got around to fixing it. But it's a total disaster. You know, there was a fun statistic I read, a little fun fact I read, that Homeland Security was tasked with finding the people who immigrated to America on student visas from 2001 until 2015, I think. I think it was 15. I'm not sure. They could not find 350,000 people. Now, let me tell you what that meant. They'd never let, if they left the country, they left the country in the back of somebody's car. They couldn't find them. So that means that you had people working here with jobs. Okay. So that means that these Ukrainians or whoever can just show up. And as long as nobody asks any questions, they can just assimilate into the country relatively quickly, I think. And I think that's going to cause a lot of racial strife in this country. Like a lot. And I also
Who do you think is who do you think is incentivized not to say anything? You're saying they can just go and get a job if no one says anything, but who would be who benefits from not saying anything?
first of all, the boss would, because you can pay somebody whatever, and they're not gonna. Okay, like okay, you're from somewhere. Let's just say, okay, there's a guy and there's a man and a woman who lived in the Ukraine. They wake up one morning and they see a tank rolling past their house. Okay, and they're thinking, oh, let's go, right? Let's just go. So they go, and they end up in somewhere in America, and he's got job skills as a, I don't know, a computer programmer or something, right? Whatever. And she's got, whatever she's got, job skill wise, equally marketable, blah, blah, blah. Do you think if the boss underpays them, that, or steals, or does what we call wage theft in this country, that they're going to go, hey, we got stolen from? No, because they don't want to go back to the Ukraine.
Then is there no system in terms of the accounting and the tax declarations that the boss would have to put through that would get flagged up?
The tax structure in this country is not exactly, what would I say? Okay. It's not exactly fair, or fair is not the right word. It's not. First of all, you can commit tax fraud for years before you're found if you do it right. We had a governor in my state who allegedly committed tax fraud for years before he was governor. Right? We had a governor in my state who allegedly, and this is allegedly, and it's the FBI alleging it, not me, committed tax fraud in my state for years before he was even discovered. Right. And then, I mean, yeah. So, and oh, by the way, I haven't even brought this up. So, all this working across borders, right? How are they going to pay you? They're going to pay you with crypto.
It's like a rabbit hole. But yeah, where does it all end? Like we've discussed you discussed a lot of the past, we've discussed the present. But where do you think it goes? Like if I had to say to you, describe the world around you in 15 years' time, what do you think it would be? So
15,
firstly,
in 15 years.
15 years, yeah.
1-5. Okay.
1-5.
In 15 years, I think we're going to know one way or the other how this Ukraine war happened or what happened with it or whatever. We're going to have a sense of what went on. Like, I think working from home will maybe not be the norm, but it'll be a lot more accepted than it is now. I wonder if there are these countries they're working on. They call them digital passports, or it's like you can work anywhere, but you have to sleep somewhere. So you can work in Portugal and or you can live in Portugal and work in Miami or something like that. I think that's going to happen, and I think you're going to see there's going to be a major destabilization around immigration all over the world because of it, and because of the whole Ukraine thing, because it's not just Ukraine, because he wants a warm weather port. What he wants is a warm weather port, Vladimir.
Mm-hmm.
So you're going to cause
what about global warming? What do you think will happen with that?
No, that's going to be terrible. I mean, last year you had tornadoes made out of fire in my country. Like fire would just. I mean, you had a friend of mine is he works in transit. He works at the transit authority in my city, and he said that in cities colder than us, their power cables for their streetcar is melting. So yeah, I think global warming is a problem. I think coastal erosion is a problem. I also think you're going to have I just have this idea that there's going to be some technology that comes along that's really going to destabilize people.
Like a vaccine?
Well, okay. Well, yeah, we're going to continue to have COVID fights and COVID problems or whatever else, but you're also going to have, so this virtual reality thing. Think about how disruptive that's going to be if, so you don't have a girl, you don't have a daughter, but think about how disruptive that would be to a family with a daughter, where the daughter could be wearing virtual reality suit in her bedroom, locked safely behind a door and all this, and she could be having a relationship with just whoever, and that person's a predator, right? And presumably, if it's a virtual reality suit, presumably nobody else can see that's not in that virtual situation. I don't know. You know, I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I feel you. I feel you. And then, just as a quick one, do you think who do you think will be the Republican nominee at the next presidential election?
Oh, I have opinions on this. Depending on how COVID goes, like depending. Okay, so what year is this? This is 2022.
Yeah, you've got the midterms this year.
Good. Yes. Depending on how COVID goes, like if people don't just suddenly start dropping dead from COVID, just all of a sudden, I think it's going to be one of these Republican governors. I really do. One of these governors that, didn't think, well, see, our governor, I think he actually did good things with COVID because he didn't close down the state, our economy is booming.
Yes, you got the All-Star game last year, didn't you?
Yeah, well, that's what you said.
The NBA.
I don't follow the basketball, but that's what you said.
I remember that from last year, that it was basically the only place in the country that would allow fans, so they took it to Atlanta.
That's cool. I mean,
But yeah, that's as a result of your governor not having
yeah,
it was open for business, I think as the phrasing was.
I think honestly, I think it's going to be one of these, unless people start dropping dead of COVID and COVID related stuff. Like, unless you literally start seeing just I mean, you already have like 1 million people dead, and God knows how many people injured, whatever. But it's got to get way worse than that. But I honestly think that the next president of the United States, if it's not Kamala Harris or Joe Biden, I mean, well, that's who it would be, right? Is Joe Biden or Kamala Harris? Probably Joe Biden. But I really do think the next Republican challenger is going to be a governor from one of these southern states.
Had COVID not been a thing, do you think Trump would have defeated Biden?
I think had COVID not been a thing, now I should say I'm not a Republican voter. I'm a Democratic voter. I should say that right now. But I'm also somebody who looks at our political system as impartially as I can. I think, honest to God, had COVID not been a thing, they would have put Donald Trump on Mount Rushmore. Because think about it. Under Donald Trump, you had the biggest economic expansion America has ever had. Right? And that's all the Republicans care about. You also had, it was, believe it or not, like he was one of the only presidents we've ever had that didn't go to war somewhere.
That's what I was just about to say. Genuinely, that he didn't enter any new conflict, and he dropped less bombs than Obama.
Exactly. And also, here's something that, now that we're 2 years into Biden, or almost 2 years into Biden, here's something that I would have to tell you that Donald Trump actually did better, probably because he didn't care. He probably had nothing to do with it, but it was probably that he didn't care, which was the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, used to put out studies about COVID during Trump, okay, for public consumption. Like you could go online, you could go on the website and look at the studies on COVID, look at the whatever on COVID, okay? They don't do that anymore. The public can see, okay? But I do think that because of COVID, Trump lost. Okay, wait. It was because of COVID, but it was also really because it wasn't just COVID. It was how he refused to admit that it was a thing. He literally refused to admit that it was going on until the very end. And he actually did like really bad things that made it worse. Actually made it worse. Like he sold off the stockpile. What else did he do? He sold off the stockpile. He lied to people. He would lie in public about COVID severity. There was lots of stuff.
And just as a start to round off, then for the midterms, what do you think the battle lines will be on both sides? What are Republicans going to say to convince people that they should be in charge of the Congress and the HOR?
Okay, well, here's what's going to happen. First of all, nobody knows how many people died of COVID. Really. Second, nobody knows how many people got injured from COVID. Really. So keep those two things in mind. The first is, the thing after that I want to say is, usually in the midterm, the party in power loses seats. Okay? Without a single vote being cast, it looks like that's going to happen this time. Okay. But also, there's been like a lot of people, like in my state, Trump got 50,000 fewer votes in 20 that he got in 16. Okay. To me, that's death. Like, just if it's just us talking, that's death. That's dying. Okay. That's from the death from COVID. Also, more people died in 21 than died in 20, and more people are probably going to die in 22 than died in 21. So, but they're all unvaccinated, and those are all Republicans. Most of those people are Republicans. So, if COVID weren't around, okay, so let me say it like this. If COVID weren't around, I would say the Republicans would win the House, and we'd have a divided government again.
And in your state, how has the expansion in the voter base? We spoke about this on your podcast, but in your state, how has the expansion of the population impacted the voting habits, so to speak?
They've gotten liberal because the only place they're moving is Atlanta. I mean, all these people, the only place they're moving is Metro Atlanta. So, but wait a minute. That's before all the work from home, right? So, okay, so if work from home weren't around, I would say they're all from Atlanta. But now that work's from home, now that you can work anywhere with fast internet, I would say, you know, there's parts of rural Georgia that have a lower cost of living. So I don't know. But on the whole, it's been more liberal than conservative, I would say.
And that's a wrap. A massive thank you to this week's guest for coming on to the show. I hope you all enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed chatting. All of the relevant social media accounts can be found in the show notes. The usual bits and pieces from me to see you out. The best way to keep up to date with the latest goings on relating to Lost for Words is to follow using the handle @LostForWordsPod on both Twitter and Instagram. Send a message on either Twitter or Instagram if you have anything you'd like to ask a guest, or for a guest suggestion, or even just to leave any feedback. The best way to support the show is to hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts, and if you use an Apple device, a 5-star review in the podcast app would be amazing. If you like what you hear, tell someone. Word of mouth also helps us to grow. Finally, to round off, all of your support and continued listening is genuinely appreciated. It means a lot to me to have you on this journey too. I am your host Jason, and I hope to have you back next week for another episode of the Lost for Words podcast.